Welcome to You Don't Know You Don't Know.
We've got quite a stack of sources right here for you today. There's a research paper doing some modeling, an article from The Atlantic that kind of gives the big picture, and then a news piece about some, well, pretty crucial investment.
Yeah, it's a deep dive into something quite worrying. The New World screwworm. This is a parasite we, mostly thought was a problem dealt with in the past.
But it's back.
It is, and it seems to be marching northwards again.
Right. So our mission today, what we want to do is take these sources, really unpack them for you, understand what this threat actually is, figure out how it's spreading so quickly, look at what's being done about it right now.
And pull out the key insights, yeah.
Yeah.
So you get the full picture.
Exactly. So you're well informed. Okay, let's jump in.
So the New World screwworm, the scientific name is Cochleomia hominivorax. It's not your average housefly, it's a parasite.
And it's the larvae that are the real problem, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. The real trouble starts there. They don't feed on dead stuff, like maggots you might think of. They infest living tissue. Warm-blooded animals primarily.
Like livestock, wildlife.
Yep, livestock, wildlife, and, yes, even humans can be hosts.
And that infestation, it sounds pretty nasty.
It is. These larvae, they actively feed on healthy flesh. They burrow in, create these deep, really severe wounds.
Which can get infected easily, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And if they aren't treated, those wounds, they can actually be fatal. Historically, this thing was a massive threat, especially for livestock across the Americas. Huge economic losses.
But hang on, didn't the U.S. and its neighbors pretty much beat this thing decades ago? I remember hearing about a big eradication program.
You're right, they did. And it was quite an incredible achievement, actually. It started way back in 1957 in the southeastern U.S.
And they used that sterile insect technique.
SIT.
That was the key. They used SIT to, well, effectively wipe out the screwworm from the U.S., then Mexico, and eventually most of Central America. Can you just remind us quickly how SIT works?
Sure. So basically you were enormous numbers of screwworm flies in a facility, millions upon millions.
Okay.
Then you sterilize the males, usually with radiation. Doesn't kill them, just makes them unable to reproduce successfully.
Uh-huh.
Then you release these sterile males out into the wild population in huge numbers. The idea is they vastly outnumber the wild, fertile males.
So the wild females mostly end up mating with sterile ones.
Exactly. And when a wild female mates with one of these sterile males, she still lays eggs, but those eggs just won't hatch.
Ah, I see.
So if you keep releasing enough sterile males generation after generation, the wild population just crashes. They basically breed themselves out of existence in that specific area.
That's clever. And they use that to push it south.
They did. They kept pushing it south. And by around 2006, they'd established what they called a biological barrier using this SIT method down at the Darien Gap in Panama.
Right, that narrow strip connecting Central and South America. Kind of a natural bottleneck.
Precisely. The idea was to hold the line there, stop reinfestation from South America where the screwworm was still endemic, still present.
Okay, so we had this buffer zone, this sort of biological wall in Panama. What went wrong? What changed?
Well, this is where the sources get concerning. Since June 2021, we've seen this significant reemergence. And it started right there in Panama, near that Darien Gap region.
Near the barrier. Was it a big outbreak straight away?
Not initially, no. In 2021, Panama reported just 5 outbreaks involving 6 domestic animals. 2022 was similar, 6 outbreaks, 7 cases. Still relatively contained, you'd think.
But
starting in 2023, the pattern changed. The spread really seemed to pick up speed, and it started moving decidedly north.
And the sources, particularly the research paper, track this path, right? Country by country?
They do, yeah. It hit Costa Rica in July 2023.
Yeah.
Then Nicaragua, that was March 2024. Honduras followed in September 2024.
And Guatemala soon after.
Just a couple of weeks later, also September 2024. It was moving.
That research paper had data up to late November 2024. What were the totals looking like then?
Pretty stark, actually. Across those 5 countries, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, there was a reported total of 788 outbreaks.
Wow. And how many animals affected?
3,847 cases in domestic animals. And maybe more worryingly, the parasite had spread 1,479 kilometers from that initial point near the Darien Gap.
Nearly 1,500 kilometers in about 3 years? A bit more. That's a really rapid advancement.
It really is. And the impact isn't just livestock anymore.
No, the sources, including the Atlantic piece, confirm that cases are now being reported in humans again as well.
Okay, so it's definitely back, it's clearly dangerous, and it's moving alarmingly fast. This brings us to that research paper, which tried to understand why. Why so fast?
Exactly. The paper really digs into the role of animal movement, doesn't it? Particularly movements helped along by people.
Absolutely. That's its core focus. They use the official outbreak data, which comes from the World Animal Health Information System, or WAS. Reliable data?
And they built models looking at the timing and location of these outbreaks.
Yeah, essentially. They used linear regression models, trying to analyze the relationship between the distance separating consecutive outbreaks and the time between them.
And they looked at distance in a couple of ways.
Right. First, the simple way. Euclidean distance. Just a straight line on the map as the crow flies, which, isn't always how things spread in reality.
Because animals or flies don't just fly over mountains or through cities in a straight line.
Precisely. So they also used a more sophisticated method called least cost path distance, or LCP. This tries to calculate the most efficient, the most likely route the parasite would actually take, considering factors on the ground.
Landscape factors, like terrain.
Terrain, yes, but not just physical barriers. That's what's really interesting about their cost map. They mapped out factors that could either slow down spread or speed it up.
Like what?
Well, high altitude might be a barrier, making it harder to cross, but things like, say, high human population density or high cattle density.
More potential hosts, more movement.
Exactly. And also proximity to roads. Roads mean regional connectivity, maybe unintentional spread by vehicles, transport.
Ah, okay. So the LCP finds the easiest path, the path of least resistance, through that complex landscape, factoring in human activity too.
That's the idea. Lower cost on their map means less resistance, easier spread along that route.
Got it. A much more realistic way of looking at potential spread routes.
Definitely. And another key thing they did in their modeling was to specifically look at outbreaks that were unusually far apart from the previous one.
Right, which leads us straight into their key findings. What did the models estimate about the speed of this thing?
So the research estimates that the screwworm is moving north at a rate of somewhere between 1.2 and 1.9 kilometers per day. That's the average speed of the front.
1 to 2 kilometers every day. That's just relentless, isn't it? A steady march.
It is. And interestingly, while both distance models, the straight line and the LCP, help track the overall spread, the LCP models, the ones considering the landscapes and human factors, they seem to fit the actual data slightly better. They gave a slightly clearer picture of the probable paths.
Okay, but the real bombshell finding, the bit that really stood out for me in that study, was about those long-distance jumps between outbreaks.
Yes, this is absolutely critical. They found that when you see consecutive outbreaks happening more than 50 kilometers apart, that strongly suggests it's not just the flies naturally dispersing on their own.
It points towards animal movement.
It strongly suggests an association with animal movements. Yeah. Think about it. A fly might travel a few kilometers, maybe 10, maybe a bit more naturally. But 50 kilometers or more, that's a big jump.
So if an outbreak pops up relatively close to the last one, okay, maybe that's natural fly spread. But if the next one is suddenly 60, 100, maybe hundreds of kilometers away, that almost certainly means someone moved an infected animal there.
That seems to be the most logical explanation, yes. The 50-kilometer threshold they identified appeared to be a good way to distinguish these, let's call them outlier displacements, the ones likely linked to human activity, probably unregulated or informal movement of livestock, which is different from how the flies would spread on their own.
That's a massive insight for control, isn't it? It means you can't just focus on where the flies might naturally go. You have to track and control animal movements.
Absolutely. It implies focusing resources on transport routes, markets, border crossings maybe, not just spraying or releasing sterile flies everywhere. And they also found
What else?
when they specifically weighted their models to give more importance to these longer displacements, the estimated overall speed of spread actually increased slightly.
Reinforcing the idea that these long jumps are accelerating the whole process.
Exactly. It supports the hypothesis that these large-scale movements, likely involving infested animals being transported, are a significant factor driving how fast this whole front is advancing.
So it's not just the flies drifting north, it's potentially people moving infected cattle, maybe unknowingly, maybe through unofficial channels, and that's really pushing it forward, and pushing it closer to Mexico and eventually the U.S. border.
That's the worry. Based on that research paper's data from November 2024, the northernmost outbreak in Guatemala put the screwworm just 165 kilometers, about 100 miles, from the Mexican border.
Okay, 165 kilometers. But the Atlantic article, which is more recent, gives an update, doesn't it? Where did it say the screwworm had reached by 2025?
Yeah, the Atlantic article, published May 2025, reported that by early 2025, the screwworm had unfortunately been detected in Oaxaca and Veracruz in Mexico.
Oaxaca and Veracruz. How far is that from the U.S. border, roughly?
The article estimates that's approximately 700 miles. So still a ways off, but considerably closer than Guatemala.
700 miles sounds like a lot, but given how fast it covered the previous 1,500 kilometers, that feels uncomfortably close. Why the rapid jump into Mexico, according to the Atlantic?
Well, the article points pretty directly at illegal cattle movements. It suggests infested animals are being transported along smuggling routes, effectively bypassing the official checkpoints and the surveillance efforts that were meant to stop this kind of thing.
Which, of course, creates a significant risk for the U.S. livestock industry, especially states like Texas right on the border.
A huge risk. The potential reintroduction into the U.S. after decades of being free of it. It's a major economic and animal health concern.
And the article suggests the U.S. might be particularly vulnerable if or when it arrives. Why is that?
Yeah, the Atlantic piece highlighted a few key vulnerabilities which are quite sobering. Firstly, many U.S. ranchers today just don't have direct experience with screwworm. It's been gone for so long, it's not something they routinely look for or know how to manage.
Out of sight, out of mind, essentially.
Pretty much. Secondly, common everyday ranching practices like branding or ear tagging, things that create small open wounds. Well, those become perfect entry points for screwworm larvae.
Oh, right. Things that were safe before are now potential risks.
Exactly. Thirdly, it mentioned that some of the most effective treatments used elsewhere aren't actually licensed for use on livestock in the U.S. market.
Seriously. So we wouldn't even have all the best tools ready.
That's a point the article raises. And finally, it notes that the workforce dedicated to regular, close inspection of animals, the range riders and vets who would spot this early, that workforce has generally diminished over the years.
So multiple factors converging. Lack of recent experience, common practices creating openings, potential lack of licensed treatments, and maybe fewer eyes on the ground. That doesn't sound good.
It highlights the need for preparedness, definitely.
Right.
Re-education, maybe changing some practices, looking into getting treatments approved quickly.
Right. So given these vulnerabilities and the rapid spread, what are the control measures actually being used right now? Is it still SIT?
Yes, the sterile insect technique is still the primary strategy. They're releasing those sterile male flies to try and break the reproductive cycle in the advancing wild population.
And the capacity for that,
Yeah.
has it increased?
It has. The main production facility, the joint U.S.-Panama one located in Panama, has significantly ramped up its output. It went from producing about 20 million sterile flies per week up to 100 million per week.
That sounds like a big jump. Is 100 million a week enough?
Well, that's the catch. The sources point out that during the original historical eradication campaigns back in the day, they sometimes needed to release up to 550 million sterile flies per week to really push it back effectively.
Wow, 550 million versus 100 million now.
Yeah. So while 100 million is a big improvement, the consensus seems to be that the current capacity, even at this boosted level, is likely insufficient on its own to actually halt the screwworm's northward progression completely. It might slow it, but maybe not stop it.
Are there other immediate actions being taken, particularly by the U.S.?
Yes, as a significant precaution, the USDA has suspended imports of live cattle from Mexico, trying to reduce the risk of bringing infested animals across the border that way.
Okay, and this is where that news piece comes in, the one about the USDA investment. That sounds crucial.
It is. It's very significant. The article from the Midland Reporter-Telegram details a recent announcement. The USDA is investing $21 million.
$21 million for what exactly?
To renovate an existing facility in Metapo, Mexico. This facility currently rears sterile fruit flies, another pest managed with SIT. The plan is to convert part of it, or maybe all of it, specifically for screwworm production.
To make more sterile screwworms for release.
Exactly. To boost the SIT program capacity.
And how much of a boost are we talking about? What's the expected output from this new Metapuff facility?
Once it's fully renovated and operational, this Metapuff facility is expected to produce an additional 60 to 100 million sterile screwworm flies every week.
An additional 60 to 100 million, on top of the 100 million from Panama.
That's the plan. So it could potentially double, or even slightly more than double, the total number of sterile flies being released each week. That's a huge enhancement to the firepower they have to combat the spread.
That really could be a game changer then, potentially getting closer to those historical release numbers.
It's certainly aiming in that direction. It addresses that capacity shortfall we just talked about.
And this investment, it really highlights the need for the U.S. and Mexico to work together on this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The USDA officials quoted in the article stressed that point. This is a shared problem requiring a coordinated binational effort to push the screwworm back south, away from the border.
So while Metapie is being built up, the current operations are just running flat out.
Yes, that's the picture. The existing U.S.-supported operations, based in Panama but releasing flies across Mexico and Central America too, are running at their full current capacity. That's the 100 million flies per week.
How do they even release that many?
It involves a lot of flights. The article mentioned they're running up to 44 flights a week, just dispersing these sterile flies over the affected areas. So the Metapie expansion is coming online to add much-needed reinforcements to that ongoing effort.
It's a massive logistical operation already. Are there any other, maybe more futuristic tools being looked at beyond SIT?
Well, yes. Researchers have proposed more advanced genetic approaches, things like developing strains where only males are produced, which could make SIT more efficient, or using sophisticated techniques like gene drives to target the wild population perhaps more effectively.
Gene drives. Those are the ones that spread a specific gene rapidly through a population, right?
That's the basic idea, yes. To introduce a trait, maybe infertility, that spreads itself.
Have any of these advanced methods been rolled out yet for screwworm?
No, not on a large scale. The sources mentioned there are still significant hurdles. Things like securing funding for development and testing, navigating the regulatory approval processes, which can be complex for genetic technologies.
And public acceptance, too, I imagine.
And public acceptance, yes. The USDA is reportedly interested in exploring these options, but they haven't reached the stage of wide-scale implementation yet. SIT remains the main tool for now.
Wow, okay. So we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've deep dived into this really concerning return of the New World screwworm, a parasite many people probably thought was, just a historical footnote.
Definitely.
We've tracked its alarming spread back up through Central America and into Mexico. We've understood, thanks to that modeling research, how much of that speed seems to be driven by human activity, specifically moving animals around.
Yeah, that 50-kilometer jump insight is key.
Absolutely. And we've seen the urgent, large-scale efforts now underway, primarily relying on the sterile insect technique, but with this crucial new investment ramping up production capacity, highlighting that vital international cooperation, especially between the U.S. and Mexico.
It really is a stark reminder, isn't it? That some threats, even ones we think we've beaten, can be incredibly persistent.
It truly is. And maybe it leaves you, the listener, with a thought to really chew on. How does this reemergence, seeing a disease like screwworm come back after successful eradication decades ago, driven largely by factors like animal movement and trade routes, both formal and informal, how does that challenge our basic assumptions about what eradication truly means in our modern world?
Yeah, what does it really mean if the conditions that allow its return still exist?
Exactly. What does this whole situation tell us about the maybe hidden risks and vulnerabilities that might be lurking just beneath the surface in our incredibly interconnected global systems, even from threats we honestly believed were permanently gone? Something to think about.
Well, that's a wrap. Hope you liked the episode. Don't miss out on new episodes of You Don't Know, You Don't Know. New episodes every week. Like and subscribe.